This week on the Destination Angler, part of the challenge on the PM is just you hook a fish and then it takes off and rounds a bend because the river's got so many twists and turns, and then boom, he's off, right?
Goes around a bend, under a log, through the woods, and to Grandma's house and back. And you're just sitting there looking at the end of your rod, wondering why your backing's in front of your eyes peeling off. I suggest panic first, run second.
Welcome to the Destination Angler Podcast, the podcast for anglers who travel. And I'm your host, Steve Haigh. We go right to the source, the local guides and experts, to build your knowledge of top fishing locations around North America. It's a big world out there. Now go and fish it.
I'm going away for a while, but I'll be back soon. Whoa, whoa.
Hey listeners, thanks for tuning in. Before we get started, wanted to let you know that next week we have the Gunnison River in Colorado with Tim Patterson, owner of Riggs Fly Shop in Ridgway, Colorado. And be sure to backcast to last week's episode on the Salmon River with Les Resegui, New York State fisheries biologist. The Salmon River boasts not one but two world records, the Great Lakes Chinook salmon record at 47 pounds and the world record Coho at 33 pounds. And please check us out on Facebook and Instagram too. We post a ton of pictures and top fly patterns after each and every podcast. Okay, so over the past 8 months or so since we started the Destination Angler podcast, it has really developed quite a following. So we have listeners in every state in America and many, many regions around the world. And we hit a major milestone last week. We now have 1,000 followers on Instagram. So a big thank you to all of our followers out there. And I thought it'd be kind of cool to bring in one of our listeners from time to time who helped us reach these milestones and hear a little bit about the fishing opportunities in their part of the world. So today I'm joined by Pasha, who is from Murmansk, Russia, who is our follower number 1,000 on Instagram. And Murmansk is in the Kola Peninsula near Finland, in case you're not familiar. Neither was I. Pasha, welcome to the show.
Hello, Steve. Thanks for inviting.
Great to have you. All right, so let me just ask you, can you tell us about the fishing opportunities in your area?
As for opportunities of fishing, it can be different. Our peninsula is washed by two seas, Bering Sea and White Sea. Also, we have a lot of water inside of peninsula. We have many lakes, rivers, small streams, and a lot of kinds of fish. It's like a perch, pike, grayling, trout, brown trout, sea trout. But general, I think it's Atlantic salmon.
Wonderful.
We have a lot of rivers with Atlantic salmon. It's a really, really big salmon.
Yeah, how big?
My biggest salmon is 17 kilo. It's around 35 pounds.
Nice job.
Yes.
Wow, that's exciting. How did you get that big salmon? What were you doing? Fly fishing?
Yes, fly fishing.
Okay. And were you were in one of the rivers there?
This is my local, it was on my local river. It's Kola River.
The Kola River. Oh, very
Kola
good.
River, yes, it's my lovely river. And I can get there without problem by my car.
Oh, that's wonderful.
We have also absolutely wild rivers where you can get only by helicopter.
Okay.
Our peninsula is the best place in Russia of salmon, Atlantic salmon fishing. It's the best place.
It's the best place.
Yes, of course.
Oh, that's fantastic.
When you come to the river, all the time you can get fish more than 10 kilo. 10 kilo, it's a middle size of the fish on Kola Peninsula.
Okay. Tell me what makes this part of Russia so special. What do you love about it?
Oh, of course, it's nature. And first of all, I think because it's situated beyond the polar circle, that is why...
The Arctic Circle, yeah.
That is why it has some benefits and drawbacks. From my point of view, the main advantage of our region is the fact that we have no sunset for a long time, for a long summer period. Yes. Polar. We have here a polar day and polar night. And in summer, sun is not setting down from the 3rd of June up to 11th of July.
My goodness.
All of 24 hours, sun is shining. Can you imagine this?
That's great. So you can fish all day and all night.
Yes, of course.
I read that Murmansk is the largest city north of the Arctic Circle with 300,000 people. Is that right?
A bit less than 300,000 people. A bit less.
Big city.
Yes. Do not miss the chance to visit Murmansk and Kola River.
You bet. It sounds wonderful. Tell me about your background. Have you lived in Murmansk all your life?
Yes. I'm living here all of my life. I was born here.
Oh, okay. Can I ask what you do for a living?
I'm working as a guide in summer, as a salmon guide.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yes, of course. And in winter, I'm working as a ski instructor, mountain skiing.
Oh, that's fantastic. You must be in good shape then. Good for you. Is fishing a big part of Russian culture up there?
Yes, many people are fond of fishing. But in our country, by this time, the fishing principle of catch and release is just beginning to develop. For Russian people, is normally catch and kill.
Okay.
Not for all, of course. Fly fishermen, fishing like a catch and release. But other fishermen, catch and kill.
Catch and kill. Oh, that's interesting. Boy, it was great talking to you, Pasha, and I really appreciate you sharing a little bit about your world up there and the great fishing that you have. And I wish you the best of luck in all that you're doing with your guiding and your ski instructing. And thank you for listening to the show and being on Instagram with the Destination Angler.
Thank you very much, Steve. Thank you very much. Same for you.
All right, great. Today, our destination is the Pere Marquette River in western Michigan, and our guest is Chris Rains, senior guide for the Pere Marquette Lodge in Baldwin, Michigan. The PM, as it's known, is a beautiful spring-fed stream flowing through dense forest and is known for heavy runs of Chinook, Coho, and Steelhead, and is also the birthplace of brown trout in America. And I'll let Chris fill us in on that. Super easy to wade, the PM is an angler's dream with deep pools and plentiful runs and riffles, which are ideal for salmon, steelhead, and trout. A little bit about Chris. He's a Michigan native and graduated from Fair State University with a degree in business management. Growing up, Chris learned to tie flies from his girlfriend's dad. After college, he sold his dirt bike and bought his first drift boat, and the rest is history. He's been fishing the PM since 1987 and has been a professional guide now for 15 years. He's also been a fly shop owner in Belize and has guided quite a bit in Alaska. Needless to say, Chris is one fishy dude and has quite a few stories to share from his adventures around the world. Chris, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. I appreciate being here, Steve.
Yeah, absolutely. Fun to have you here. So, all right, I got to ask you, so you sold your dirt bike to buy a drift boat. So you must have had quite a passion for this, huh?
Yeah, it started pretty early on. I grew up on a lake fishing and, obviously a little red white bobber and a worm and a bluegill got the whole thing started. But after college, I had the good fortune of being able to move to an area in western Michigan that has not only the Pere Marquette River, but a bunch of other great streams around there. And what started out as just a little fun afternoon riding out by the river and going fishing on the dirt bike quickly changed to selling the dirt bike, buying the drift boat, and the rest, well, as they say, is history.
Yeah. Okay. But did you dump the girlfriend too?
That girlfriend did not last very long. The lessons her father taught me have lived on. But yeah, that one's history a long, long time ago. But yeah, really was fortunate to get introduced to fly tying early on. I was an avid fisherman and I enjoyed fishing for bluegills with fly rod. Once the bobber and worm thing kind of got old, then switched over to the fly rod. And yeah, when I was 15 years old, Roger introduced me to fly tying and bought me my first fly tying kit. And, I think I alluded to this when we talked earlier. There's a lot of different flies that you can teach a 15-year-old kid how to tie, maybe a San Juan worm, a glow bug, or, some easy pattern. But no,
something simple. Yeah.
He decided to really tax me from the start, and he made me tie a royal wolf. And
oh my gosh.
Yeah, so I learned that the first pattern was a very complicated pattern, and I must have tied a half a dozen to them. it'd take me the better part of a couple of days to tie one. And every Saturday I'd go over there and I'd show him what I tied, and he'd push it back over at me and say, no, not good enough. And finally, after 6 or 8 attempts, I showed him one and he says, that's good. And he put it in a clear acrylic box and he said, save this fly and never use it. You'll appreciate it when you get older. And so I took that clear acrylic box and I put it in my fishing vest, and he made me tie another one. And so I tied another one, and after I tied that one and that one was acceptable, he took me out to a little tiny planted trout stream near my home. Turned out it was just about an hour bicycle ride away. Once he showed me the way, I just took over from there. So, but started my fly fishing career when I was 15 years old. Riding my
That's
bike.
great.
Toss a hand-tied Royal Coachman into the trees. And unlike what he advised me to do, I did not save that first fly.
I was going to ask you about that.
After I ran out of the ones I had, I reached in there and I opened that clear acrylic box and I pulled that first one that I ever tied out, and I proceeded to throw that one into a tree too. And 40-some years later or whatever, I wish I would have listened to his advice. I wish I had that fly still.
That'd be kind of cool.
Yeah.
I think the first fly I tied was a woolly worm, pretty easy pattern. I can't imagine trying to tie a royal trout or a royal coachman, with those wings. It'd be difficult for a kid. Oh my gosh.
Roger was a real sadomasochist, that Roger was. So.
I guess. But he got you into fly fishing, which is pretty good. So, all right. So let's dive in. So tell us about Western Michigan and the PM. What makes it so special? What makes it so unique?
Well, there's a lot of different things about the PM that make it unique in Western Michigan. The number one thing that makes it unique and different is that it is the only river that supports migratory fish in Western Michigan and, maybe even into the Midwest. Of the size runs that we have, that is a free-flowing river with no dam. There's famous tailwaters all over the country, and there's some pretty famous ones north and south of us in Michigan. But having a free-flowing river that the fish can go from the lake all the way up into the tiniest of tributaries is unique, and the fish take full advantage of it. I own a chunk of it up in the upper middle branch, and there's still salmon flowing into there right now. I was out there this afternoon, and there's coho spawning, there's brook trout spawning, there's
nice
brown trout spawning, and there's even a few Chinook left around. And the only way that those things are doing that and getting up into those, the headwaters is because there's no dam. Another unique part about it is there's no industry, there's no agriculture, and there's no big cities anywhere along the river. And so with that said, we've got a really clean and cold and wonderful water quality and a great river because of it. Our watershed is protected. It flows through the Huron-Manistee National Forest. And, not having farms and towns and everything right on the edge of the river dumping pollutants and things like that, it makes it a very clean and clear river and, just like I said, high water quality. So it's a great, great river.
That's great. And it's pretty wadeable, too, from end to end, isn't it?
That's another good characteristic of it is it's wadeable and it's accessible. There's a lot of access points from top to bottom where, the average angler can pick up a local map and drive around and find a great spot that they can enjoy 12 months out of the year. It's another unique thing about it. It fishes 12 months out of the year. We've got steelhead in there 6-8 months of the year, and we've got salmon in there for 2 months, and then the resident trout are there year round.
Okay, so you've got coho, Chinook, and resident, and it's mostly brown trout, correct?
Mm-hmm. No, yep. There's browns, there's rainbows, there's brook trout. Especially once you start getting up into the, the main branch of the river has a few rainbows and a few brookies, but once you start getting into the tributaries and the upper branches of the river, you'll find a really diverse, fishery up there. And, there's more than just the main, the 9 miles called the Flywater is what most people are most familiar with. And that's great. But, there's 90 fishable miles to that river. And I fish it from top to bottom. I live in the headwaters and I fish it clear down to the mouth.
Does it get pretty tight up in those upper reaches, or can you make a cast?
It absolutely does. No, it's a whole different game. It's small stream tactics up there. And, you get down into the lower river and you can bomb out a 60, 70-foot spay cast with a 2-inch rod, So,
Nice.
and you can go up into the headwaters and be fishing a 7-foot or a 6.5-foot one weight, So it's got some different faces to it. And I think that's what I like best, I think, depending on the time of the year and the fish that you're chasing, you've got a lot of room to roam around there.
Where is the PM? It's in Western Michigan, but, what are the major sections? Kind of break it down for us.
Yeah, sure. So the main section of the river flows from Baldwin. It flows westerly to a small town called Ludington on the shores of Lake Michigan, and that's where it dumps in via Pere Marquette Lake. So the river, as I mentioned earlier, has about 90 fishable miles, and most people are familiar with the Baldwin area and the fly fishing only section. In fact, features some of the best water. So that's what most people are most familiar with, but dotted all along from, the headwaters down to the mouth, there's a ton of different access points. And depending on the species that you're chasing, if it's a migratory species, for instance, yesterday when I was guiding, I was down 7 miles from the mouth of the river. This afternoon when I was walking around in my yard looking at fish that are 90 miles away, up in the headwaters where it's, 5, 6 feet wide, or 5, 6 feet deep and 20 feet wide, or, downstream it might be 10, 12 feet deep and, maybe 30, 40 feet wide. So the river has a lot of different faces to it. And again, depending on the species and the time of year that you're doing, that you're out there, you might be fishing anywhere between Baldwin and Ludington.
Okay. And I used to fish the PM quite a bit back in the 90s. And I can remember just, what I loved about it was that it sort of had a lot of meanders in it, right? So lots of twists and turns. And therefore you had a lot of, deep pools and undercut banks and things. And, that provided a lot of cover for the fish, right?
It's amazing. It flows right through the Huron-Manistee National Forest, and it twists and turns like none other.
Right.
I've heard it said that is the sign of a young river. I've had smarter people than me in my boat, well, nearly every day. But a couple of them were the geologist types, and they said that as the river gets older and older, like the Mississippi, it starts flowing straighter and straighter. So,
okay, that makes sense.
I guess this is a young river in the grand scheme of things, and it twists and turns so much. And there's undercut banks, and there's, it was a logging river back in the day, and there's so much debris, woody debris in it. And, the fact that it's going through the woods, and it has got some great hiding places for the resident browns. It's got great, as you mentioned, I think in the intro, something about the riffles and runs. And there's just, it's mainly gravel with a lot of sand and some clay. And it changes, again, the demeanor of the river changes from the headwaters to the tailwaters where it enters Lake Michigan. It's slower. The gradient drop is less. But, there's a section in the middle of the river, Rainbow Rapids, where it's the biggest gradient drop in the entire system. And I think you might, in the 7 miles, you might get 30 foot of drop. So, there's some faster water, but, it's all clean and clear. And it definitely flows fast enough to remain open most years, 12 months out of the year. Certain sections of it will freeze up in the dead of winter. But otherwise, it's open to fishing on the main branch year-round. And there's pretty much a fish to catch every day of the year out there.
How about that? It's a good place to be a guide, too.
Yeah, it works out good that way as well.
That works out pretty well. So I was in Colorado earlier this summer and came across this really cool app called Trout Routes. If you've ever looked for a good map to help you with anything from public access to finding the best trout streams in a given area, I highly recommend checking out Trout Routes. Trout Routes has mapped out each and every trout stream by state, covering public land, access, places to camp, hiking trails, stream flows, bridge access points, boat launches, fly shops, and even interactive elevation charts. And you can download maps for offline use. Today they cover 7 states, including Colorado and the Driftless region in the Midwest. Hey, we did a show on the Driftless a couple of months ago. And good news, they're working on a big update to add 7 new states, including Montana, Wyoming, and Michigan. So if you have an upcoming trip or looking to explore nearby streams, I suggest you check out Trout Routes today on your Apple or Android phone. So, what's the story on the birthplace of the brown trout in America? Can you tell us that?
Yeah. So this is certainly a unique feature to the river and to the area. Brown trout were never in North America. Brown trout were first introduced into the. We kind of embellish this a little bit, but since this is being aired, I got to be exactly honest here. We like to lay claim to them on the Pere Marquette, but it was the Baldwin River that is the biggest tributary to the Pere Marquette, where they were first introduced, just a couple miles upstream of where it flows into the Pere Marquette. So
okay,
our river system is the first place that brown trout were ever introduced. In fact, there was a guy in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. He had some. He was a German fella, and he had some brown trout, and he wanted to trade the state of Michigan for whitefish. And I think that was the best trade the state of Michigan ever made.
Yeah, I was going to say, good deal, man. You can have them.
We won. So we won as anglers. We won, and that was in the late 1800s. And, that was the start of things. That was 1860s or something, and that was the start of things right then and there. The river it got its name from Father Pere Marquette. He was a Jesuit priest in the area.
Yeah.
He, of course, saved all the heathens. And then there was fur trading going on, and there was logging going on. And the early settlers were just starting to learn how to, fish for entertainment. It was the sport of royalty in Europe and stuff. And so, some of the big wigs from the big logging guys and the big, some of these big mill owners and stuff, they wanted to have some sport. And, of course, the people wanted food. And so they introduced the brown trout, and then our native species, I think we kind of touched base on this, you and I, when we were talking ahead of time, but our native species were brook trout and grayling, along with some, whitefish and suckers. And now our fishery features, brown trout from Europe, steelhead from the Pacific, and then all the Pacific salmon. And in fact, some of the Great Lakes have Atlantic salmon. So we have now all of the fish that we had, minus the grayling, plus this great, Pacific salmon fishery and the steelhead fishery.
Yeah.
And now these fish have naturalized, and we have wild runs of them. We don't plant anything, and we don't plant any steelhead. We don't plant any salmon in our river, in the main branch of our river. We do plant a few brown trout to supplement the fishery that we have. And by a few, I mean like 5,000 to 8,000 a year. It's not many. They drop a few hundred off at each bridge. And really, we've got this fantastic fishery. And then, the grayling went away when the loggers decimated the area, and because of the logging operations that we had in all these rivers, they used the rivers as a way to transport their logs. So we got a lot of erosion and a lot of sedimentation, and a lot of our water warmed up because the trees that were surrounding it were all cut down. And over the years, the Michigan DNR, the Trout Unlimited, and a lot of just local individuals have done a lot to restore tons and tons of rivers throughout the state, and the Pere Marquette is no exception to that. And it's returned to, as close as it's ever been to its natural state. Every year it gets better and better from that point of view on just, what we're fixing from our past mistakes. And we're at a point in Michigan that they're trying to reintroduce the grayling to Michigan as well. And that's really exciting news. And we're on the list of rivers to introduce it into. They've been looking and researching several different rivers in Michigan, and some of our tributaries to the Pere Marquette are on the list of where they might introduce them. Now, I don't suspect that it will be of the first, but I think if they can get this program to take roots, that we would eventually see some grayling in the Pere Marquette tributaries and there's Pere Marquette watershed. Not necessarily in the main branch, but yeah, so we're not so far away from it. A gal named Nicole Watson is doing it through grant through the Michigan State University, and it's really exciting. It's cool to see. I know there's a lot of mixed feelings on planted fish and systems, but to reestablish a spawning colony that could naturalize, I think, is a good thing for what was once a native species.
Yeah, it'd be nice to have grayling to go after. It'd be really, really fun for anglers, I would think.
Yeah, plus they look cool. And
They do.
they chow down on dry flies.
Yeah, I've heard that. We did a show a couple of weeks ago on the Yukon, and the guy up there said that grayling will pretty much hit anything that you float over them. It's hard to find a big one, but you can catch a lot of them.
Could be one of the reasons why they're not around in Michigan anymore.
Yeah,
They're
maybe
too easy to catch.
Well, I was reading back, those fishing clubs that were all over Michigan, turn of the century through maybe the 1920s. There was one up there that had a creel limit of 25 fish a day.
Oh, my.
Like, how long is that going to last, when people are keeping that many fish in a day?
Our forefathers, they were sporting, but they were not very conservation-minded. But, back then it was a different world. It was a different time, and they didn't know that they could deplete the resource. Now, today, we have a much better understanding. And, there's a little bit of ignorance out there. I find it in a very few amount of the people that come here, though. Most people are very interested in conserving this resource. I'm a catch and release guide, and it's real interesting because, there's a handful of people that still think when you go fishing that you end up with fish to eat afterwards.
Yeah, I hear that too. Yeah, they do. Why do you fish if you're not going to keep them? They say things like that. Well, where do I start?
Yeah, exactly. So, you just look at them, smile, and you say, you should take up tennis.
That's right. One last guy I'm going to be bumping into on the river.
Yeah. So it's not for everybody.
So the steelhead were planted in the 1800s as well, right?
Yeah. In fact, I told you that in our first discussion, and I thought, well, I better get the number. 1876. So they followed the Browns about a decade later. I think the Browns were 1868. I didn't Google that, but the rainbows came, and that's what the old timers all call them, the big bows. Those rainbows came from California, and they brought them in real early on, and it's interesting because with all the hype around salmon, and that was done in the late 60s and early 70s. It's funny that most people just associate that must be when they brought the steelhead in too. But no, the steelhead have been around. And you talk about those fishing clubs, those guys, I've seen, grandpa on one end of a stick, they cut the stick off the tree and it's 10 feet long. And then the grandson's on the other end of the stick and they got it hoisted over their shoulder and there's 25 rainbows laying across it, and it's like, yeah, fishing was good today.
Yeah.
And then, you talk to some of these old timers and they go, man, you should have seen it in the old days. And you think, well, you should have let a few go. And then we wouldn't be having this discussion, but yeah.
My grandfather had hunted and fished all over North America, Alaska, the Yukon, Manitoba, all over the place, and Michigan. And same thing. We've got pictures in our house of, lots of dead fish, all piled up and a lot of other things. So it was just kind of the way people thought back then. Like you said, they just didn't realize they could deplete the resource.
Yeah, it seemed vast and endless at the time. I mean, I'm trying to give them credit. Maybe they were just, I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, let's give them credit because, they were all dressed cool and stuff. So
yeah. Now, the logging seemed pretty obvious. That blows my mind. The way Michigan was logged, just bare, it seems like, from bank to bank and all that. Most of that wood you guys have up there is new growth wood. There's very little old growth up there, right?
It's true. Yeah, we have Hartwick pines right up in the center of the state, northern Michigan, that has some old growth, and it's really amazing what how decimated they made the place. But yeah, we did a historical book for Lake County, and I was serving as a township clerk, and so all these old timers would bring in these pictures and seeing just the vast wasteland that they left behind. It's amazing that we have what we do, and I guess we owe that to, I don't know, Teddy Roosevelt or something.
Somebody. Well, they did build some really cool cabins, though, didn't they? I mean, some of those old fishing camps are pretty amazing.
Yeah, I heard, rumor is we built Chicago with a bunch of our wood, too, but then Mrs. McGillicuddy's husband came home late at night, and the horse kicked over the lantern, burned the place down. We had to build it
and they
twice.
needed more wood.
Yeah.
Well, hey, talk about, I mean, there's a lot of excellent rivers in Western Michigan, right? What can you tell us just a little bit about some of the other rivers in the area?
There are no other rivers that can compete with this one. No.
Now, I was thinking you used to guide on some of those other rivers, but maybe not.
Yeah, no, I do. And it's really pretty neat. Honestly, you could start right down at the southern border of Michigan at the state line with the St. Joe River, and you could work your way all the way up to, the Mackinac Bridge. And there's a river probably less than every 30 to 50 miles that supports a migratory run. The St. Joe has a great run of summer steelhead.
They do, yeah.
You keep going up the Kalamazoo River right north of that. It's got good fishing. The Rabbit River, the Black River. You come, right into the Grand River, which is the granddaddy of them all, has the biggest runs. They run right through the middle of Grand Rapids, and you can sit in a boat in the middle of the Grand River surrounded by skyscrapers and highways, and you can catch steelhead left and right. It's amazing, if that's your thing, and I've done it a number of times. I enjoy sitting down there sometimes because it's a totally different, it's an urban fishery. But as soon as you start getting north of that, then, the next major river is the Muskegon River. And the Muskegon River, that stretches nearly all the way up to Hartwick Pines where we're talking about. I mean, it goes way up to Houghton Lake.
Center of the state.
Yeah, right through the center. And that thing, but, it fishes below the last dam. Croton, it fishes great for migratory fish, but there's smallmouth fishery all the way right up through Big Rapids, which is where I went to college at Ferris. I lived on the river there, and we fished pike and smallmouth right behind our house. And then, north of the Muskegon River is the White River, and that's a great little fishery. And then you get a little bit further north and you run right into our river, the Pere Marquette. We're kind of dead set in the center of the state from north to south. And it's kind of, I think Newaygo and that kind of claims where the north begins. But, you get further north of the Pere Marquette, and there's a couple sleeper streams that I won't mention because they're pretty good. But you got the Little Man and the Big Man, and
the Manistee.
You start getting, the Betsy and the Platte, and you kind of walk around the corner and you start getting up into some of those very northern western rivers over there. And we haven't even mentioned the Osable River. It flows over to the east side of the state, and that's a pretty well-known stream in its own right. So, it's a pretty great place to be in Michigan as far as if you like to fish. And there's a bunch of lakes, too. So you can do what you want around here, and you're never too far from a body of water right here.
Yeah, absolutely. So on the PM, how good can the fishing be? Like, what's a typical day for you hookup wise?
Oh, we catch more than you can count, bigger than you can reach. No, every day.
Good answer.
It's a humbling river. It's a difficult river, it's a challenging river, and it's a rewarding river all at the same time. I tell people all the time, and I can figure a guy out pretty quick when he's new to fly fishing. If he's after numbers, A, this isn't the sport, and B, this isn't the place. You want the biggest numbers or the most fish, you go find yourself a tailwater and do a bunch of nymphing and catch the same cookie cutter ones over and over again. Our fish are challenging, and I think that's what's exciting about being a guide. The river changes every day. I hate to admit it, but I'm, willing to. I get my ego handed to me right at the boat launch every now and again. You might as well check those right out. You can fish that river well, and you can get some great fish, and you can fish that river well, and you can have just a wonderful day of looking at the water. It's not a matter. I've been out west to some great tailwaters, and I've heard them say that the river will fish as good as you fish it. And I've seen that. I've seen that in a number of places. The Pere Marquette does not honor that system. You can fish it well, and you can get snubbed. So a typical day out there, in my opinion, a typical day, if you catch a fish, you won. If you're fishing for a salmon or fishing for a steelhead or fishing for a big brown and you catch one of those, you won. And if that can't give you gratitude of winning, then, you better take solace in your casting. And because that's the risk reward there, is that you go out with the mindset of catching a bunch of fish. And there's a handful of times of the year where I feel like I can catch every one, but those are few and far between, and they're fleeting moments. What I like to teach people as a guide, I want to teach you how to bring your game to the next level, how to, ensure that you are doing things right. I have guys come this time of year, we're steelhead fishing. I have guys come to me all the time and say, I'm finally booking a steelhead trip because I go out there and I get skunked. And I said, well, part of going steelhead fishing, the name of the game, depending on how you're doing it, is that you're not going to catch a lot of fish, especially the moment you put a fly rod in your hand. You're basically big game hunting with a recurve bow, if you want to use that analogy. And I tell that to guys, you want to catch the most fish, you grab the red and white bobber, you grab the gold hook, and you grab a box of worms, and you go sit on the end of a dock and catch all the bluegill you want. You know why there's no bluegill fishing guides? Because it's too easy. Nobody wants it that easy. It's, nothing in life that's easy is
worth it.
Sought after. Yeah. People seek the challenge of learning and bringing themselves and elevating their game. And that's what we do as guides. And it's certainly what I do as a guide. Some guys are just trying to go out there and get the most numbers as possible. And I've been there and I've done that. I've guided a long time. And now I want to educate. I want to provide you entertainment, educate you, have a safe, fun trip. And we're going to catch some fish along the way if you do everything right. And if we do everything right and we don't catch fish along the way, then it's probably the fish's fault, and you have to accept that. Everybody wants to blame the cast or blame the fly or blame the guide, but at a certain point, you got to blame the fish.
They just didn't want to eat.
Yeah, they got to be held responsible.
Yeah. Oh man, that's a really great way to talk about success, right? It's not about. I always ask people, how good can the fishing be, number of hookups and things. 'Cause I know in the Great Lakes, people are doing better than they are out west for the most part. They're catching more fish.
Well, that's a fact.
Yeah.
It's different and it changes. It's ever changing. So to say, I fish 3 species 12 months out of the year. I fish salmon, steelhead, and trout. And any one of those species have their days. I mentioned the Grand River and Grand Rapids. I have sat down there and with another fishing guide and hooked 50 or 60 steelhead. That's unheard of anywhere on the planet.
It is.
I had one day on the Pere Marquette where we got nearly that many fish. And there's the dam downtown Grand Rapids is called 6th Street. And I had a guy in the boat with me. And after hooking so many steelhead, he says, I'm from Grand Rapids and this is better than 6th Street. And I said, not normally.
Yeah.
So it changes, and it changes day by day. Here's another good story. This is a great story, and I think everybody can relate to this. I had these 2 guys, and I do guide occasionally on the Muskegon River. I had these 2 guys. They came from Saginaw, Michigan, which is world-class walleye and perch fishery, right? So one of the guys I've had a number of times, and one was a new guy to steelhead fishing. We took my jet sled. We went down the Muskegon River. We launched the boat. We rolled up into a hole. We proceeded to catch, I don't remember the number. It was double digits, and it was probably close to catch land at 20 steelhead. It was ridiculous. It was the best day of the season. And that was one day out of the season, right? So that was amazing. I had them booked for 2 days. Of course, we go back, and the one guy who had never steelhead fished, he says, I've fished for a lot of things in my life. He says, I fished for walleye, I fished for perch, I fished for pike. I've never caught so many fish in my life as today. And I said, that's really interesting when you can compare the number of perch you've caught in a day to the number of steelhead you caught.
Right.
Yeah. And he says, this is amazing. And I said, hey, well, we got tomorrow, so we go back to the same exact spot. We drop anchor, we set up the fish, same fish, same everything. We throw in there within 3 casts. We hook our first fish. They're high-fiving each other. They said, it's going to be just like yesterday. And an hour and a half went by, and we hadn't landed another one. And I looked at them, and I go, you guys should have been here yesterday. They started laughing so hard. At the end of the day, we landed, I know how many fish we landed that day. We landed 6. 6 steelhead in a day is an amazing day of steelhead fishing.
Yeah,
and
good day.
They were disappointed. And I said, guys,
of course.
This is the problem.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, part of the challenge on the PM is just you hook a fish and then it takes off and rounds a bend because the river's got so many twists and turns, and then boom, he's off, right?
Goes around a bend under a log through the woods and to Grandma's house and back. and, and you're just sitting there looking at the end of your rod, wondering why your backing's in front of your eyes peeling off.
Are you like taking off after these fish? Like if you hook one and he's heading down a bend, you just got to run for it, or what do you do?
Yeah, panic. I suggest panic first, run second. I actually do occasionally, but they all seem to panic on their own. If we're in a boat, I'll chase them down. Depending on, if we're steelhead fishing in the lower river, like right now, what we're doing right now. We had one lap the boat 3 times yesterday or 2 days ago.
Lap the boat? What do you mean lap the boat? Like go around you?
Like I was doing laps around the boat. Yeah, like chrome steelhead on fire. Yeah, they're just these chrome missiles. I mean, they're just relentless. They hit and they run. It's a whole hit and run. And I pull anchor and chase them if we're boat fishing. If we're wade fishing, yeah, we try to keep proper rod angles. And see, these are the things. Regardless of what happened to that fish after you hooked it, you're going to learn how to fight these fish properly. I'm going to teach you about rod angles. I'm going to teach you about leverage and the proper way to set the hook and the direction to set the hook and when to, like Kenny Rogers said, you got to know when to hold them. You got to know when to fold them. You got to know when to walk away, and you better run right now.
Yeah.
That fish is getting downstream. So, you got to, sometimes you run, sometimes you walk, sometimes you laugh, sometimes you cry.
Yeah. When you talk about rod angle, tell me a little bit about that.
Well, that's trade secret, Steve. Well,
no, come on, man.
Rod angle low and downstream for the initial hook set, when we're standing and waiting.
Okay.
It doesn't really matter. People have a tendency of pulling in an opposite way of the pressure, especially beginner fishermen. So I see a lot of guys setting the hook upstream. I explain the fundamentals of how you win this game, and the fundamentals start with a good foundation, and the foundation begins with the presentation. And the very next thing that happens after you get a good presentation, you're going to get an opportunity for a hook set sooner or later. When you do that, you pull it low and downstream. Feeding fish feed with their heads pointed into the current upstream. So if you hook a fish and you pull upstream, you're going to be pulling that fly out of that fish's mouth from the beginning. Now, if you barely catch its lip or something, then you're going to be okay, but you're going to get a less than optimal hook set. And now you're going to try to fight that fish, as you so eloquently put it. You may be running around the corner after him, and you got him barely hooked in the top of the lip because you pulled it up and away. How long is that going to stay? If you pull it down and low into the corner, the jawbone, and you get it stuck in the scissors, then you got something to work with.
Okay. So these guys don't hook themselves, huh?
Occasionally they'll turn and take it. But yeah, not so often. But that's we gotta go fishing sometimes, Steve.
You gotta fish. I got you. All right, all the fishing you've done on the PM, can you tell us your most memorable fish, either with a client or on your own?
Wow, my most memorable fish. My most memorable fish is really easy. Just a zillion things just went flying through my head just now. And I know you sent me a list of things you're going to ask me, and that was probably on it, but I didn't do my homework. So you caught me off guard with that. What I can tell you right now, it was my first fish on a fly rod, my first steelhead on a fly rod from the Pere Marquette. And it was in the upper fly water, and it was under the willow. And that willow is now fallen over, and I actually ate a drift boat a few years ago, but now it's just a mere spit of a turn and a little tiny bucket where it used to be a nice deep run. And I make my clients, even though that I know that like 60% of the time there's not going to be a fish in there, I stop and I tell them, we're going to throw a few casts in here.
We're going to fish here.
Yeah, just because this is where I caught my first steelhead ever on a fly rod.
No kidding.
Yeah, that one stands out
that's
pretty
cool.
good. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good one.
How about that? You landed the thing, huh?
Yeah, well, I was the first landed one. Yeah, I think I probably.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
I did a lot of steelhead fishing on the Little Manistee. The Little Manistee had a nice trail system along through 6 and 9 mile road, and that dirt bike that this whole thing started with, it was an enduro, so I could ride it from Ludington up there, and there was a good trail system in there, and so I looked pretty funny because I'd ride it wearing my waders, and I had my fly rod strapped to the side of it. And I'd get in between.
You got a picture of that?
No, I don't. No, I always went by myself. I'm kind of a solo guy. Yeah, that would have been pretty funny. But I'd just go up there, and I did a lot of steelhead fishing up there in the beginning, just because I had a good access with the dirt bike. But then once I got the drift boat, then it was kind of game over.
Okay.
That was about 25 years ago, so maybe a little longer. Actually, it was, yeah.
So how did you end up getting into guiding? So you get a drift boat and all of a sudden you're everybody's best friend. And the next thing you know, you're guiding. Like, how did all that play out?
Well, isn't that the truth? Drift boat, pickup truck, everybody's best friend, fish guide. Yep, that's how it went. Right, like that.
Let's go, Chris.
You got me. Well, let's see. I got fired from the pizza place. No, I'm uniquely unqualified to do anything else. No, it found me. I don't know. It just sounds cheesy, but it's just what I was meant to do. It found me. It found me at an early age, fly fishing. I struggled with the workaday world for a little bit. I went to college, got that degree, got the big job, I flew around. I was a national account manager for a company. I was a regional sales manager. I worked for a couple different building product manufacturers. I had some pretty, high demanding jobs, high travel, high stress. And all along the way, I'd always take clients back here. I'd bring my favorite clients from around the country and my favorite salesmen, and I'd bring them here to Pere Marquette, and we'd hire a guide, and I'd be the other quote guide, and I really enjoyed it. My buddies were guides, and I always thought, man, this is the life. But you got to, it's like the trout bum thing. You got to have this rusty old truck, and you got to live off of peanut butter and dirt, and it just seemed like it was so unattainable.
Yeah, maybe not.
I already had a couple kids. I had a 30-foot boat sitting in a slip in a marina in Ludington, and a house you could see Lake Michigan from, and a couple of cars, and all the expenses that go with that. As much as that is, that's just, it's kind of, to me, it was a pipe dream. And my passion was the river, and I had a chance to take a leap of faith about 15 years ago, and I just chose this path, and I made an effort, and I couldn't have really done it at a much worse time. The whole crash of '08, right when I was getting started, that whole thing was going on, and the economy just took a giant dump, and I just gave up a pretty good job and a career in an industry and everything else, and I just I just decided I was going to do it, and there was everybody was telling me I couldn't do it, and that just helped, because I was always that guy that, you just tell me you can't do something and I'm going to do it. You tell me I should do something and I won't do it. You tell me, I'm that
oppositional
guy. Yeah. You should eat your vegetables. Well, I ain't eating those vegetables. You can't eat vegetables. Well, I'm eating them.
Don't touch those vegetables. Okay.
Yeah, you shouldn't be a fishing guide. Well, yeah, you're right. I probably shouldn't. You can't be a fishing guide. The hell I can't. Watch this. So
then you did it.
Hold my whiskey and watch this. So yeah, I did it, and I'm doing it, and it's tough, and it's fun, and it's exciting, and it's a challenge still to this day. I count my blessings. I wake up in the morning, I'm out there with the birds chirping and the sun rising, and I'm wrapping things up with the sun setting and the owls kind of cooing, and it's like, man, I'm living this life that's so, it's like counterculture, and it's so, I've had the good fortune of being able to take my show on the road. I've been up to Alaska a few times. As I mentioned to you before, I guide up there in the summertime, and I've been down in the Caribbean. I opened a fly shop down there 5 years ago. So, if you just want to be a guide on the Pere Marquette, you're going to grind it out, and you're going to live in a van down by the river eating peanut butter and dirt sandwiches. But, if you, if you kind of take what you have, and most of the real successful guides around here do, split their time amongst here and somewhere else. And so
somewhere else, yeah,
it's not a kind of a career that you can, just choose one thing. You got to really work it. You got to be good at your trade, and you got to constantly hone your skills, and you got to bring something that, because anybody can hire anybody as a fishing guide. So you got to bring something, to the table that's a little bit different than the next guy, and give people a reason to want to come fish with you again, or want to come fish with you in the first place.
No, that's awesome. And now you're the head guide at the Pere Marquette Lodge, right?
Yeah, well, I've been the head guide there for quite a while. We don't really have a head guide there any longer. It's not a head guide position. In fact, when I was the head guide, all the other kind of guides kind of, it's this thing where there's a pecking order, and like the head guide got all the trips, and you're working with your buddies, and you're seeing these young kids getting started, and as the head guide, I suggested something that really, I'm not the smartest guy. You'll figure it out real quick around me the more you're around me. But as the head guide, I suggested to the owner, who's a buddy of mine, that we shouldn't have a head guide. We should go into this rotation where we share the amount of trips. If there's going to be 500 trips and there's 5 guides, let's give every guide 100 trips instead of the head guide gets the first trip every day. I was doing way more trips than everybody else, but there's this animosity. And then, and you see these young kids starting out, I'm an old guy, and you see these young kids, and I got kids the age of some of these kids coming in, and, it's hard to break into that scene when there's this head guide and pecking order, and, you're the 5th guide on the roster. And so you no longer get, if there's 4 trips in a day, guess what? You're not going out that day. If there's 3 trips on the next day, you're not. The 5th guide on the roster might as well go out and paint houses or mow lawns, because he's never going to get any trips. I mean, he'll get trips in the fall for salmon season and a few for spring steelhead, and that's it. And then the rest of the time, he's sitting around trying to pick the dirt out of that peanut butter and dirt sandwich.
Kind of hard to bring a young guy along if you're not giving him any trips. That's kind of nice of you to do that.
Yeah. So, it changed the whole way that we are around there. I enjoyed that position of that. And, I'm the senior guide there. I've guided as long there as anybody. There's another guy there, Ryan, that's guided actually longer than me. But between Ryan and Frank and I, we've got, we probably have 50 years experience between the 3 of us.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I've been there. It's a great fly shop too. And you guys offer lodging. People can stay overnight there, right?
Yeah, there's 2 houses, 5 cabins, and then the main lodge that has 10 different rooms. So it's a great place. It's a great place to come for as a group, as a big group, as a small group. We do weddings there. We do parties there. We do events there. We have steelhead schools, salmon school, trout schools. We feature all the different type, dry fly trout, streamer, mousing, all of it. So, yeah, there's always something to do up there. That's for sure. PM Lodge.
Oh, that's cool. So, tell me a little bit about Alaska. So, you guys see some grizzly bears up there?
Daily.
Yeah, that's right.
Daily. I can't wait for you to ask me my highlight question of Alaska.
Come on, let's hear it.
Well, we went over this a little bit, didn't we, Steve? The low light was when I heard a bear breathing for the first time in my life, and you have to be real close to the bear to hear him breathe. And he was right outside my tent because we were camped on a bear trail, and that was quite exciting, and really limited the amount of sleep I got after that for the remainder of the trip. But yeah, I guide for a guy named Pat McDonough out of Falls Creek Outdoors, and we guide the Connecticut River, which is a 90-mile limited use permit river, where that means basically you're not going to see humans for a couple of days at a time. And then the few humans you do see are just some other fishermen mid-river. And then once you get down into the lower river, that it gets slightly busier. But
okay.
I had the good fortune of guiding up there last summer. This year we closed it down because we do a 90-mile float from the glacial mountains. We fly into a lake and have all of our gear. We tent camp every night. The float's 90 miles. We do it in 7 days, 6 nights. And we start off in the mountains on a glacial lake. Like I said, it's just beautiful, remote, rugged. It's insanely beautiful. And you float from that mountain 90 miles, and then you end up at the mouth of the river in the Bering Sea at a small Eskimo village. And whoever survives gets to fly home, and the guides have to fly back up the mountain and do it again. It's amazing. It's a little man versus wild mixed with river monsters, and it's absolutely amazing. If you've never been to Alaska, this is the only way of doing Alaska. I've had the good fortune of being to Alaska a number of times, and I've been to different types of lodges, and there's flyouts, and there's this and there's that. But if you want an adventure of a lifetime, you have to do this. I mean, endless grayling. We talked to grayling, earlier. You say they're hard to find big ones. Not on the Connecticut.
Huh.
There's 20-inch grayling up there, and they just clobber dry flies. There's not a lot of them, but if you're diligent about it, and you grayling fish hard, you'll get a 20-incher up there.
That's cool.
Bunch of leopard bows and all 5 species of Pacific salmon, and it is one amazing fishery. If you throw a cast out and it doesn't get eaten, I tell the guys right then and there they should call Alaska Fish and Wildlife and ask for a partial refund of your fishing license because you just got robbed out of a cast. That's not fishing. That's catching. That's catching there.
Wow, that's fun.
Those are 100 fish days if you're good.
What's the name of the lodge?
It's Falls Creek Outdoors, and it's the Connecticut River. There is no lodge. We fly all of our gear up on beavers.
I see.
You land, you get in your waders, you hop on a plane, and you get out, and the guides have the rafts set up and all filled full of gear, and then you float down the river. The minute you get there, you hop into a raft, you start floating and fishing, and we pull over on the side of the river, set camp. We have a base camp, or not base camp, but we have we have each individual 2 people per tent, and then we have a dining tent and we have a cook tent, and it's mobile. We just set it up and break it down, and every day you're fishing. Sun really never sets up there that time of year, so you can fish probably 20 hours a day if you really don't need sleep. So you fish all day from the raft, and then when we get to camp, after camp set up and that, there you go, fish. So it's a fish-a-thon.
That's great. Are you going to try to open that back up again next year?
Yeah, it's up to the village whether they'll allow the flights in and out. So it's an Eskimo village, and the native corporation owns the runway, and that's where we use the runway to get our equipment out and back up to the top. And so if they don't let people in, we can't do our operation. It's a logistical nightmare to go somewhere else, but the little village of Quinnock. But yeah, the plan is to go back up there again next year, and you can, however, just get a hold of you, and they can get a hold of me, and we can go.
Good.
So it's limited to, 6 clients a week. It's a small personal trip. You don't hear planes overhead. You don't see. I mean, it is amazing to be that remote. Like it's really cool to really, really, really know that you are alone. It's cool. Except for the bears.
Yeah, I love that.
The bears will keep you company.
Yeah, you got a little bear breathing on you when you're sleeping.
Yeah.
Chris, all right, so back to the PM for a little bit here towards the end of the show. Can you give us a rundown of the seasons? Like what are you doing spring, summer, fall? When are the major runs of salmon and steelhead? Kind of when do they peak? What are you doing in the summer for trout fishing? Give us a little rundown.
Yeah, absolutely. It's pretty straightforward. So I'll go from here. So we're today's, November, whatever. We're early November. We are, at the beginning of our fall steelhead run. Our fall steelhead run will continue to improve and then kind of flatten out in December. By mid-December, the amount of fish that have come, and they'll start to really hole up and really settle in for the winter. So we get our run, follow, our first big push of fish, follow the salmon up, and then with all the rainfall that we receive in November, they'll continue to come up. By December, they settle into the holes. Then we kind of get into winter steelheading. Winter steelheading's December, January, February. On any day where it breaks freezing, you can expect to, hook a fish. On a good day, especially towards the end of February, you can expect to hook a few fish. Any warm period, any warm up in the middle of winter, and I'm talking fly fishing. There's guys out there center pinning spawn bags and throwing lures that can, those numbers change. But if you're out there with a fly rod, you're swinging a fly in the wintertime, you're just trying to get a grab, trying to get a bite, and be happy with it. As February switches to March, our first spring thaw occurs, and our spring run of fish start to enter the river. The winter fish that have wintered over, the winter steelhead, are now the first ones to hit the gravels and start spawning. So beginning of March, you got the winter fish, spawning. You got the spring fish pushing in. It's the highest concentration of fish in our system for the year. Is towards the end of March and the beginning of April is the biggest push of fish that we'll see all year.
Okay.
It's our fall fish, our winter fish, and our spring fish in March. Those fall fish and winter fish start kind of backing out of the system. And in April, we just get some trickle, we get some more spring fish trickling in, and the remainder of the spring fish kind of wrap up by the end of April. Beginning of May, is kind of a changeover thing. Last weekend of April is opening day of trout season. And opening day of trout season in northern Michigan can be 70 degrees or it can be 27 degrees. You never know. It can be snowing or you could be wearing, shorts and flip-flops. So if the weather's warm, our first, decent dry fly hatch of the year is we get a little black stonefly, and our tiny black stones kind of kick things off. But the first notable hatch of the year for dry fly anglers that most people really kind of key up on is the Henny. And, with the Hendrickson hatch, the PM has kind of a hit or miss Hendrickson hatch. It's not as strong as some of the northern rivers. The Au Sable is real famous for it, but we quickly start to kick into our own fabled and famed hatches, which are the drakes. And the gray drake is the big one that we have. And the gray drake hatch starts in mid-May and it lasts through the end of June. So it's a 6-week hatch, and it's a prolific hatch that occurs really up and down the river for about 40 miles. So it's a huge hatch. It's widespread. And within that period of time, though, there's a lot of, I did a story on this once. I called it the puzzling trout, and it was the masking hatches. Gray drakes tend to bounce in front of your face at about 5 to 6 feet off of the water surface, and fish will be feeding all over, and all you can see is gray drakes in your face, but they're 5 or 6 feet off the water. The fish are feeding on the water. Well, it turns out they're feeding on sulfurs and yellow sallies. We have the little yellow sally, we have the sulfur,
Okay.
and the gray drakes are all over in your vision, but the fish are actually feeding down there on something else. And so, and then I mentioned this to you in our first conversation that we have a salmon fly hatch. We have a Pteronarcis, and that big old salmon fly flopping around on the water gets chewed on, and that's what kind of kicks off our big fish looking up, and then we start mousing, and then we have a hex hatch, and then we go right into a hopper season. And after the hopper season, by mid-August, we're already in the lower river looking for the first kings that enter. And it's the one time of the year that I will ditch a fly rod and throw a spin rod in my hand and a crankbait, because these early kings are amazing. They're my favorite fish in Michigan to go after, just for the sheer power and might. We cast crankbaits in the mouth of the river, and these fresh kings in August grab these crankbaits. Heck, some of the times they'll break the crankbait in half just grabbing it. And they'll take a swung fly occasionally, but they'll only occasionally take the crankbait too. So, like I said, it's a one time a year for about 2 weeks. You can catch me with a spin rod in my hand. I'll be down there with everybody else throwing those, because it is the best ride in the park when you get a hold of a fresh 30-pound king on a lure. So,
yeah, what kind of a fight does a 30-pound king put up?
Well, it's basically like, I don't know, if you took and threw your line out and hooked the back end of a car driving past, doing about 35. Yank. Yeah. And then just, so from 0 to 35 in the blink of an eye. So they got a lot of power. They hit. I'll compare it to, what I'll compare it to is tarpon. They hit and they fight like a tarpon. They give you that hard, heavy pull that you can't get out of anything else. I've caught muskie, I've caught pike, I've caught steelhead, I've caught every freshwater species that's big that can really give you a big old yank. And there's nothing like a fresh king that'll pull you hard to where you're not sure you're not going to fall in. And I mean, they are knuckle busting, they're bruisers. It's, I call them the Mack trucks. When you're out there with one of those things, that thing is bulldogging you. And and we're using medium light tackle when we are spin fishing for them. And then, once they kind of get up in the main river and that, then when they start to get in the pocket waters, we'll swing 11 weights at them. And some of the fly fishing, we taught numbers earlier, and I know guys come up to northern Michigan and I hooked 50 or 60 salmon. Well, when you're salmon fishing, if you hook 50 or 60, you are doing it wrong. You're going to get 3 to 5 bites a day if you're doing it right. A lot of people foul hook these fish. They'll cast across and they'll walk out on the beds. These guys treat these things like they're just inanimate objects. They're wild fish that should be respected. And a lot of king fishing, especially with the fly rod, gets frowned upon because people use it for evil. It's not the fly rod's fault, and it certainly isn't the salmon's fault. It's the angler's fault. And when somebody tells you, I hooked 50 kings and landed 10, I look them right in the eye and I tell them, you were doing it wrong, because you're not going to get those numbers. You're going to get 3 to 5 bites on a decent day. On a good day, you might get 5 or 10. But you need to, watch yourself out there and do the right thing. And, it's a challenge to fish around this environment that's been created with these guys. But again, I like to educate, teach people, and entertain them. And I'm going to educate you about how to properly salmon fish. And you don't worry if that guy's hooking every single fish around him right next to you, because he is not letting them bite the hook. We spend a little bit of time on that. Once the fish enter the upper river, we fly fish for them and we swing them up, and they're a lot of fun. And when they swim over and bite that egg-sucking leech or that stonefly, it's really cool. And they're a big fish. Now, they're so much further upstream and they're not as fresh as when they first enter, but it's still an exciting fishery. And the cohos are in there and the trout are in there and the occasional steelhead. And, we just have such a fantastic, diverse fishery. And so that's September and October. And then, it brings you right here to November where we sit today, and it's back to the steelhead. So it's just 12 months out of the year. There's a lot of fun, a lot of big fish out there to be caught. Summertime, when we're fly fishing for trout, we're looking at trout, at 20 inches being a trophy. And so, you look at, a 20-pound steelhead being a trophy, a 30-pound salmon being a trophy, or a 20-inch trout being a trophy. And you just adjust your technique and the size of the gear that you're going after them. But I'll tell you, you got a 20-inch brown trout on the surface in the middle of the night using a hex or a mouse, and you got your hands full with that too, a similar way as you do with a 10, 15-pound steelhead or a 20 or 30-pound salmon. We keep downsizing. We tend to use the lightest equipment possible to put the odds a little bit in the favor of the fish. Why?
Yeah, that's good.
Fishermen. I don't know.
We're sporting, right? What's your setup, for salmon and steelhead? What kind of a rod, setup are you using?
I'll say this right here and right now. I'm an Orvis endorsed guide, and I believe in Orvis's equipment, not only because I'm an endorsed guide and they take great care of me, but I think they take good care of the customers no matter who they are, and they make great equipment. So my preferred rod right now for steelhead, we'll just go back to what I'm doing today. I'll throw a 9-foot 7 or 8 weight at them. The Recons are great rods. Helios are great rods.
Yeah.
And the Clearwaters are good rods. If you want an inexpensive rod, you get a Clearwater. You want to spend all the money you can, you buy a Helios and the Recons in between. And they have great rods at all price levels. I use 9-foot 8 weights as a standard for a steelhead this time of year, maybe a 7 weight, maybe. So we do a couple different styles of fishing. And if I'm throwing a big rod, I use 11-foot 7 weight. They have the Missions now by Orvis, and those are great. I use the 11-7 switch rods. Scientific Anglers make some great lines for those, and Scientific Anglers and Michigan Company. I'll use those all the way through the spring. And then once I start trout fishing, I kind of skipped over streamer season for browns. But, when I'm streamer fishing for browns, I use a 9-foot 7 weight, with a 350 grain. We switch up and do a lot of different types of trout fishing. So at night, I'm using that same 9-foot 7 weight with a glow line. If I'm fishing hexes or I'm fishing mice.
With a glow line. Okay.
Yeah. During the day when I'm doing, some of the smaller sulfurs and stuff, I might use a 4 weight, 8.5-foot 4 weight or a 9-foot 4 weight. The best all-around trout rod for all summer long that you can use in a lot of different situations be a 9-foot 5 weight with a weight forward floating. And then, that'll take you right through hopper season. You can use that 9-foot 5 weight through hoppers and everything else.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, and then right back to the fall, and you get my salmon rods. I'm using Orvis is making a 9-foot 11 weight with a fighting butt on it, and they're unbreakable. Well, I shouldn't
That's
say
a better
that.
one.
They're strong.
Yeah, I just broke one.
I didn't have anybody break them this year, and I usually break a few rods a year. My clients do, and
that's good. I'm curious, what is your, give us a rundown of some of your top flight patterns for, the different fish you're chasing.
So this time of year, it's pretty straightforward. You're going to use a glow bug or a nuke egg. The eggs are still present and prevalent in the river. You use, simple strategy, bright fly, bright day, dark fly, dark day. The nymphs, as the eggs start to deplete from the system, the nymphs, black stones, size 12, black stone, size 10, green caddis, those are excellent patterns. They're printed on those steelhead when they're juveniles, and they're first in the river. They eat a ton of nymphs, and so hare's ear works good. And then as the winter progresses, we start to swing a lot of flies and use a lot of flashy flies and, use some colorful heads. And again, you bright days, bright flies, dark days, dark flies. As it comes back around to spring, you're back into the nymph and egg game. And so you're going to be using a lot of glow bugs. You downsize them in the spring. You're using, maybe a size 10 or 12 glow bug to a small, you're trying to replicate a steelhead egg, which is about 6 millimeter, and the salmon eggs are 8 millimeters. So you upsize the patterns, but downsize them for spring. And then the nymph game gets real strong as the spring progresses because, the nymphs are actually quite active. And then we have this huge fry hatch. And as we switch from steelhead into, and actually the steelhead eat the fry too quite well, but as we switch into the trout season, our first thing, I mentioned hatches the last go around here, but our first real thing is streamer fishing. And, you can start with some small streamers. Everybody wants to throw these triple articulated, gym socks at them where you don't really have to. I have as much success with a 2-inch long white fly as I do with a 7-inch long triple articulated double back Lindy.
Okay.
Blah, blah, blah.
What streamer patterns do you like then?
Well, I like Zuddler, conehead Zuddler minnows. There's a fly. I actually got featured in a book, America's Favorite Flies. People like Lefty Cray and stuff were in it. And then they had a couple oddball people like me in it.
Nice.
But money fly is in there. Bullface bugger. Those are good streamers. And then once you start kind of getting into the dry flies, I just tie all my own. If you're looking for some good commercial flies, there's McCoy's Drake is a great one for our great Drake. The real McCoy, a buddy of mine, Ed McCoy, he's a great tire, and his are commercially available through Orvis.
Oh, nice.
You can't go wrong if you get some of his stuff. And but we all tie. I mean, that's we all tie our own dry fly. Well, not all of us, but I mean, a lot of the guides do. And I've been trying since I was 15. So 35 years later, I still like doing it. But there's just a handful of local patterns. You want your flies, you go into the fly shop and check out what we have on tap right then and there, because we're going to be current on what you need. And, but like at night, you can use, when we're mouse fishing, you can use Mr. Hankey's a great mouse. And then, when it comes to salmon flies, when we enter into the fall in September and stuff, you're just using some, Estes eggs and, some flashy stuff, egg sucking leeches. And then, we circle right back around to the glow bugs and nuke eggs of steelhead now. So, as you can see, it's just some eggs, nymphs, and some streamers and some mice and, just some basic stuff along the way. So nothing terribly fancy.
Good rundown. No, thank you. All right. I got one more question for you. Your bio online says something about going to college and a teacher strike and most kids. Tell me that story. What happened with that?
Yeah, well, that was the big mistake of Ferris. Yeah, I was 18, fresh out of high school. I lived in a small town in the middle of Michigan, no real good trout streams, that one that I had to ride my bike to. But yeah, we went to, they sent me off to college, and first thing the teachers did were go on strike. And, that meant no class. And then, there's 16,000 college students, I guess there are like 11,000 college students. Everybody's drinking beer, and the beer store runs out of beer, and the pizza store runs out of pizza. And, me and my buddy, we figured out we could eat pizza, drink beer, and go fishing. So we hopped in the car and drove straight from Big Rapids all the way to the mouth. It was a fall. It was September, and we drove right straight to Ludington, and we fished every bridge on the way back. We were the typical first timers, just bridge fishermen, just going and talking to everybody. And this is what I say, go out there and make a friend, look for somebody. I ran across a guy in the beginning of my fishing on the Pere Marquette in this area, Jeff Slade. He was a real helpful fellow for me. And you'll find a friend. There's so much now with social media and all these other things, and our schools that we offer at the PN Lodge, and just the different opportunities. Find a friend. And find somebody who's better than you. Try to just, if you're looking for somebody, or if you have a lot of experience, if you're not getting first started, hire a guide, and we break down the curve for you. But yeah, I didn't have that. I had to teach myself, and that's what kind of led me into guiding. I didn't have a dad who took me fishing. I didn't have uncle or a grandpa. My grandpa's died, and my dad was a hard worker, and I didn't have anybody to take me fishing, so I had to figure it out on my own. And that's what turned me into a guide, because I was the guy that always had. I was the friend to everybody. Hey, can I go fishing?
You were the guy. Well,
plus I had that.
You had your girlfriend's dad, though, right? Who made you tie up.
Yeah, Roger.
Tough love.
Roger was the first guy, yeah. So
Roger.
Yeah, no, it worked out good, and it worked out good, and yeah, it was a good thing that those teachers went on strike, and that the Pere Marquette was real close to my college, and the rest, as they say, is history.
Oh, that's great. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. I feel like we got a whirlwind tour of your life, which was great.
Yeah.
Hey, we will post pictures of your fly box on our Facebook and Instagram page. And Chris, how can people get in touch with you?
The easiest way of getting in touch with me is call my cell phone. I mean, can I tell that number? Can I say that?
Sure, yeah.
231-794-8892. I'm not big into the computers. I am on Facebook, Chris Rains, and if you want to book a trip or whatever, you just call the Pere Marquette River Lodge, and they got a website, www.pmlodge.com. Ask for me. A lot of people around here call me Uber, so you kind of got to either way, Chris or Uber. But
ask for Uber.
And just for the record, I was Uber before they were Uber, so. But that's a whole nother podcast. So anyhow, get a hold of me through the PM Lodge, or call me on my cell phone, or, get a hold of you. And, I'm sure you'll provide some link on your website. So, I'd love to take you fishing. If you're listening to this and you think that this is good stuff, come visit me. I got 8 hours worth of this crap.
Heck yeah. Sounds amazing. Well, good deal. Listen, all you people out there, thanks for listening. And Chris, thanks for being on the podcast. I wish you extraordinary success with your family and all your adventures. And you folks can email me with comments and suggestions at shaig50@gmail.com. That's shaigh50@gmail.com. As always, our music is by A Brothers Fountain. Hey, please give us a share, like, or follow on Instagram and Facebook, and be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Hope you enjoy the show, and we will see you again next week.
Well, I'll go from the land to the shining sea. But I know there's more to life than what the eye can see.